Hello, welcome back to this channel. I'm Spellsinger and this is going to be a review of the gamebook series Sagard the Barbarian. Now, the way this is going to work is the same old setup, so I'll begin with the title and book number. I'll go into the origins of this story just briefly, then I shall read the blurb from my copy, talk a little bit about the game mechanics and the adventure sheet, and then go through the artwork, maybe mention some of my likes and dislikes, talk about the fun facts that I found, and then finish on a summary and score. Now, this is quite an old series of books. This came out in 1986, this first one. That's when it was published. So Sagard the Barbarian, book number 1 was The Ice Dragon. And the authors are two Americans, Gary Gygax and Flint Dill. And the cover art here for the UK book was Gino Dachil, I think is how you pronounce that. It was a slightly different cover for the American, which is this one here, but the internal artwork was done by a fellow by the name of Leslie Morrill. So just to touch on the origin for this, this all came about back in late September 1985. Pocket Books published the first of 4 game books, written by, as I say, Gygax and Dill, about the adventures of Sagard the Barbarian. And Gygax, he also is the co-creator of the Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games. I think they entered the sort of the adventure game book craze around about 1985. So obviously they had some interest and got involved in all that with this Sagard the Barbarian. The series is 4, so 4 books, 4 interactive books. They all take place in Gygax's world of Greyhawk. Sagard's adventure in this one, the Ice Dragon, it begins in a kind of mountain range called the Rakers, which make up the borders of Ratic. Now, Gygax, he co-wrote this series with Flint Dill, and Dill's other works have included the Transformers series, the old Generation 1, I believe it was, and the G.I. Joe TV series as well. Gygax met Dill while he was in Hollywood, working with the Dungeons and Dragons animated series, and his relationship with Dill led to Gygax asking Dill's sister, Lorraine Williams, to help save the floundering TSR, the Tactical Studies Rule, back in 1984. And by the end of 85, the same year as The Ice Dragon was published, late 85, early 86, Gygax sold his stock in TSR to Williams and ended his relationship with the company. So there's a short origin story for you. So let me read the blurb for this adventure. This one is basically, you are Sagard the Barbarian battling the terrors of the northern wilderness. You must face the ordeal of courage to become a fully fledged warrior. You will encounter the deadliest of enemies, the razor-clawed devil bear and the hideous great furred serpent. But will you survive the supreme test of all, battling the Ice Dragon? So there you go. Now, the plot for this story is quite straightforward. You're introduced to Sagard and you're a young 16-year-old to begin with. And basically you're preparing to undertake the ordeal of courage. Basically to prove that you're a warrior, essentially. And you pass through the ordeal of courage to prove that you're this sort of barbarian that's worthy to stay within the tribe. The ordeal involves going off on an adventure, essentially, and bringing back various trophies to prove that you were successful in battle. And this is a good game book. There's definitely strategy to it. You need to collect these trophies to win the game, but you also need to survive. The dilemma makes for an interesting challenge. So which battles do you avoid and which trophies do you collect? So you've got to weigh this up as you progress through this story. And that's the plot. Nice and straightforward. The game mechanics and the adventure sheet in this one, the game system is slightly different from what you're used to with the Fighting Fantasy rules. You need a 4-sided dice, so instead of the usual 6-sided, and you can flip through the book. All the pages are they're all numbered, so as you can see there, and you can flip through if you don't have a dice, similar to the old Fighting Fantasy ones as well. So there's that. There's that as well. In the combat encounters, you basically roll a die, you keep track of the stat, and then you deduct the damage from your hit points. And there's nothing too unusual or different here, and the campaign itself is not too complicated. The characters and opponents are rated for hit points, which determine how much damage an individual can take before they're defeated. The characters and opponents are also rated by level, which represents their skill in their combat. The effectiveness in combat is determined by rolling the four-sided die, comparing the results to the character's statistic block, which is right here. So you get an idea. You can get an idea of this this image here. So you've got your name, and you've got your level. So you start off as level 2, and then you've got these 1 of 0, 2 of 1, 3 of 1. So basically, what that means is if you roll the die and you get a 1, you do 0 damage. If you roll a die and you get a 2, you do 1 damage, and so on. Underneath that, you can see the endurance. So you start with 20, and obviously once you get to 0, you'll have a reference to go to where it's game over, basically. But then underneath that, you can see the villain as well. So in this case, you've got the name and you've got their level, so obviously significantly higher. And therefore, you're going to take more damage should you get hit. But of course, their endurance is that much less, so it kind of balances out. It's a good system, but I think it could have worked maybe better with 6-sided die, but the adventure path is quite linear. You can pass through the ordeal of courage quite easily, even if you miss the odd trophy. The combat system is very reliant on dice roll, but if you're unlucky in that area, then you can still find ways to restore your hit points, before or even after battle. You will only have to think a little bit in your quest. It's not a tease to the brain, this one, to confront the ice dragon. It's easy. It's relatively easy it's not easy to fail unless you pick up, obviously, like a counter intuitive path that you might want to do for fun. But otherwise, you shouldn't have too much trouble in this one. Unlike the Fighting Fantasy game books, Sagard does provide a simple system for character advancement as well. So as you win and lose battles, you acquire and lose experience marks. So when Sagard has acquired enough marks, he then goes up in level, basically. So that's quite a nice sort of, you could take that campaign progression from maybe Gygax's D&D days. That might explain where that's come from, but it works really well and obviously progresses through the books, because of course these books, you keep the same character, so anything you learn or gain in this book will progress on to the next one, a bit like Steve Jackson's Sorcery Epic. So here you can see the adventure sheet. It's quite different. You've got your experience marks to put on there, your current level, and any trophies on the right hand side there that you pick up. And underneath that, you can keep a record of your hit points, any weapons and armor. And to the side of weapons and armor, you write the effect that they have on combat. So, for example, if you pick up a Valkyrie sword, it might just suggest that every time you're successful, you roll for your damage, but increase it by 1 point until the fight is over. And underneath that, you've got the special items as well. So any powers that they might give you will be noted there. So it's not hugely complicated, and it doesn't change throughout the whole series. The only strange thing is the trophies remain, and the trophies are only really important in book 1, so I don't think they disappear until book 4. And the good other thing about the experience marks, the point where you level up is 20, so you start off at 0, and as you fight your way through this book, you will gain experience, and then when you hit 20, you'll go up to level 3. And then when you hit 60, you go up to level 4, and 4 is basically the top level for your character. Artwork. The illustrations are mostly good. One curious fact is that the interior artist, Leslie Morrill, he illustrated many Choose Your Own Adventure books, but he never came round to illustrating another game book with a series with a full game system, which is a bit unusual. But I quite like them. They're quite simplistic, but they suit this style of book quite nicely. I've got a favourite, this one here. This is the Frosty Sage who you encounter this fella when you're looking for a map for the Ice Dragon's cave. And he's quite an epic fight. He's one of the stronger characters that you will come across, actually. But yeah, the artwork, I do like it. It's quite detailed, and he's got his axe there, and the descriptive work that goes with it is quite nice too. So it kind of accompanies the artwork in a good way. Likes and dislikes. I really like the experience points that you can gain as you progress through this book, and they give you your character attributes. And I think that's associated with D&D. That's got to be Gygax's influence there. I really like the descriptive quality of the writing. I love the gathering of the trophies, only to discover a much greater aim later on in the story. And the rolling over of the character is something I always really enjoy. You know, you've got that in The Way of the Tiger as well as Steve Jackson's Sorcery Epic. And it just kind of gives you that sense of campaign progression that I mentioned. And it kind of makes you want to do well in the early books so that you stand a chance in the later books. But of course, in this one, they're not particularly difficult. So should you level up in book 1, level 2 or 3, you're going to get to book 2 and not find it quite as difficult. Not so keen on the number of encounters. It's almost every other page, and the length of combat sometimes can be quite high. So for example, if you imagine you come into an encounter and it's you against 4 others, you will roll your attack against the encounters and then all 4 of them will roll the attack against you. So you could be there for some time rolling that die until the end of the battle. And if you've had a few where it's more than one villain or encounter, then yeah, that can drag out quite a lot throughout this book, but it's all part of it. Fun facts. Gygax, the American game designer, he was also an author best known for creating that tabletop role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. I'm sure everybody's heard of with Dave Arneson. And then in the 1960s, Gygax created an organisation of wargaming clubs, founded the Gen Con gaming convention. And then in 1971, he co-developed Chainmail, which is like a miniatures war game based on medieval warfare, with Jeff Perrin. And then he co-founded the company TSR, Tactical Studies Rules, with his childhood friend, Don Kay. So that was back in 1973. So you've got all that really rich history, and it's all come to fruition, and then you pick up on it in this series of books. So if you're a big fan of the D&D, and you've not read these, then I would recommend them. Right, a summary and score for this book. As a game book, The Ice Dragon is quite short. There was only 121 entries, and there's only 3 different ways to find a conclusion, whereas obviously in the Fighting Fantasy books there was 400 entries, but typically you only had one conclusion. The game elements of The Ice Dragon, they're limited. Well, so you're using your 4-sided die for combat, and it's quite heavily slanted in the player's favour. It's possible to die in Ice Dragon, but the likelihood is small. It's not a tough adventure. The main interest that the Ice Dragon holds is that it's written by Gygax, and that it takes place within his world, Greyhawk. And in the end, the book, it didn't really feel noticeably Gygaxian to me, which led me to think that maybe Flint Dill had written most of it. Likewise, the Greyhawk content was limited to only a few place names here and there. The later books, even less so. So maybe it was to do with Gygax being forbidden from using certain names as a result of his departure from TSR. That could have been it. I'm not terribly sure. But the book is set in this northern region of Nyrond, from the Greyhawk campaign setting, which in turn forms part of the Dungeons and Dragons mythos. And the setting is kind of like a mountainous story, and it contains all the basic elements, cornerstones and cliches of the Conan the Barbarian. Now, Conan the Barbarian, I think, was 1981, so a bit before this, but there is definitely a similarity in style to the good old Conan the Barbarian. It also includes a science fiction element as well, which probably an influence from the early D&D setting. The objective is to hunt for, like I say, as many of these trophies as you can, as many as you can find, which are won by fighting battles mostly. However, achieving the objective will require following a major quest all the way to the end and then completing it. The design of this book is very elementary, although the player is offered different paths and alternatives to try. The events follow the same kind of general path no matter what the choices are made. Choices are, for the most part, rather obvious in most cases, and then in other cases almost inconsequential. The adventure is one of the kind of hack and slash style adventures, a bit like the ones that Sir Ian Livingstone loved to do for fighting fantasy. So yeah, hardly 2 sections go by where you're not involved in a combat. But I don't mind it, I quite like the combat, so it's no big deal. The system is designed so that the player will almost certainly lose several hit points in any given combat, even against a weak opponent. Combat, however, is the book's main downfall for me. Most of the fights in the book are rather easy to win. And there's many opportunities to replenish your player's hit strength, your hit points as well. Tough battles are only come by if you take like a foolish or make a foolish choice or take a foolish path. So proceeding all the way to the end is not very difficult. The choices, they don't really impact the difficulty of the adventure much either, and as a result, collecting the needed trophies and completing the adventure successfully is quite easy. Completing the book will leave you with a more powerful character, like I said, from obviously the experience points that you will have racked up. But then, of course, like I said, it makes the next book even that much more easier. The book is fun, it's short, but it's overall, there's little here to really challenge the experienced game player. So if you are a hardened veteran, you won't struggle with this one too much, and you may come away sort of wanting a bit more. But then there are 3 more books to follow up. So it also introduces the reader to a detailed sort of non-Tolkien-esque setting. However, for this reason alone, it would be worth having a look at these books. So The Ice Dragon is a decent effort for a basic hack and slash game book. The phone is like I say, is basic, but all in all, this one is it's fine. It's a good attempt, and it's a good world that the Sagard is set in. So if you're in between game books, yeah, try this one out. I think out of 10, I would probably have to give it a 6, just because of the basic nature of it after what we're used to, and certainly compared to, and you can't compare it to the modern game books that are coming out these days, but certainly compared to some of the game books that were coming out around at this time with Way of the Tiger and Fighting Fantasy, it is definitely a little bit more simplistic, shall we say. Yeah, so there we go, The Ice Dragon. It's a good little adventure. I do recommend it, but yeah, I can't really give it more than 6 out of 10. So if you like that review, I will go on to read the next one, which is The Green Hydra, book 2. So if you like this, give it a thumbs up, maybe share it if you know someone who you think might enjoy it, maybe leave a comment about your thoughts of this review, and I will catch you in the next one.